good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to our afternoon session of the Deathcare Superconference 2024. I'm so glad to be here with you all, and it is my distinct honor and privilege to be moderating a panel on diversity, equity, and inclusion. I would like to invite on my panelists. Today we have Vienna. I'd also like you to join me in welcoming Joelle.
Are you sitting down?
And last but not least is Jasmine. On the screen, we have Tiana and we have Alex. Experiences and perspectives, and discussing how those relate to one another and interact with each other and build on each other and agree or maybe even disagree with each other. And we're really excited to be bringing that conversation to you here today. A little bit more about me. I am the managing funeral director of the Co-op Funeral Home of People's Memorial right here in Seattle, Washington. Stop. A non-for-profit funeral home here in Seattle since 2007, part of People's Memorial Association, which has been around since 1939. And I cannot think of a greater honor than to be associated with those folks. And I thank them and the other sponsors and organizers and presenters for being here today. So thank you for joining us. So I think if we may, I'd like to sort of go down the row here and ask my panelists to introduce themselves, talk a little bit about their experiences and their perspectives, and then give a few minutes to that. And then as we sort of go through that, then we'll have some time to interact with one another as panelists and see where those conversations take us. So Vienna, would you like to begin, please?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Vienna Lopes Booth, and I just want to first share with you a story about how I came to be here today. I'm not an industry professional. I'm just a regular person who was asked to do what is now in a regular thing. On a November day in 2021, I went to my dad's apartment. He answered the door, and I was really shocked. I hadn't seen him in 2 months, and he looked like a dead man walking. My dad, Charles Old Briar Lopes, a proud Black and Wampanoag man, he had a deep mistrust and fear of the medical institution. With a lifetime of negative experiences coupled with the long, ugly history of violence, disrespect, and utter disregard of Black and brown bodies, who could really blame him? It's just sciatica and a stomach bug, he said, and I'm getting better, as we begged him to go to the hospital for literally 2 days straight. It wasn't until I moved to call the ambulance that he finally begrudgingly agreed. At the hospital, our fears were confirmed, diagnosis end-stage prostate cancer, no treatment options, and 2 to 14 days to live. The doctors were shocked he was even alive given his lab results, and he begged to go home to die. And I'm afraid a story like this is not unusual for someone who looks like him. A few years earlier, I attempted to broach the topic of death with him. He sort of looked at me and bristled, and he said, "We don't need to talk about this now," as if talking about it would make it happen. And now, as he lay clinging to life, he had an unusual request. He asked me to have a home wake. He trusted only us to really care for his body, and that mistrust of institutions really ran deep. And he didn't want to be alone in a strange building with strange people, living or non-living. And his lifetime agency has always been really important to him, and this was really no exception. I had really no idea where to begin in the process, and shaking so much, you see? I had no idea where to begin in the process, and the clock was ticking. So I left my job. I moved in with him to his apartment an hour and a half away in my hometown, and I parked a sleeping mat on his bedroom floor where I spent his final chapter of his life with him. He, long surpassing the 2 to 14 days to live, he lived 97 days. I was able to honor his body, his life, and his death in the way in which he desired. My family kept him home for a 4-day vigil where we tended to him, each other, and our ceremonial fire. We even had a spirited game of spades, one of his favorite card games, in the bedroom where his body lay. We carried his body out of the home he loved on the land that he held so many memories for him one last time. We laid his shrouded body down on the land he held a deep connection with near his beloved garden and encircled him in ritual and love in a sunrise ceremony. As we loaded his body into the car, the 2 groups of Canadian geese, they flew extraordinarily low in this beautiful 2 flying V formations. And as we loaded his body into the car and brought him on his final ride to cremation, I played a song in my native Wampanoag language that starts, "Anan man, mana anan," and it translates the full song in entirety is Creator, help us to grieve, help us to heal, strengthen us. A few days later, we had a small family funeral where we laid him to rest in power on tribal land next to his brother and father. Robin Wall Kimmerer, she said, "Our elders say that ceremonies are the way we remember to remember. Ceremony is a vehicle for belonging to a family, to a people, and to the land." Through this initiation, this last request, I was able to experience the power of ceremonial remembering. At every turn, I felt the whisperings of my ancestors guiding this process, having the space and time to be with us in this very intimate way helped me to feel deeply connected to another way, my ancestral way, me remembering to remember, me reconnecting in this liminal space to all that has been taken from our family and my people. My kin were beaten, shamed, killed away from our culture, and conventional death care feels like another form of forced assimilation. This send-off my dad asked for not only deeply impacted me, but the ripples of impact were large and small. My in-laws, they completely changed their death plan upon coming to his services, and my cousin, who's a tribal medicine man, asked me how he could do this for himself. Creating this ritual space for my dad was the proudest moment of my life. And I felt like I had climbed Mount Everest. But the thing is, I didn't need to feel like I climbed Mount Everest. The loss of a beloved is already hard enough, but I hit some serious gatekeeping along every part of this journey to help my dad do this. The Oxford Dictionary definition of gatekeeping, the activity of controlling and usually limiting general access to something. After spending every living moment with my dad during these last 97 days, the 4 days of home wake gave me the time to be with his lifeless body and fully take in this momentous loss I was experiencing. Taking care of my dad's body was not hard. It was probably the easiest thing of the whole entire process. We used Techna Ice and it worked beautifully over the 4 days to keep his body cool, completing the 8 pages of paperwork. One, which was extra because he was a veteran, was not hard. It probably took me 30 minutes to fill out. What was hard about the process was the resistance from the people necessary to get them on board. The knee-jerk reaction from the people was like, "What? No, no, no." And the town clerk was the first person I had to visit to figure out how to go about doing this. And that took me several visits to her, and then also imploring that my dad served this country during the Vietnam, that she finally softened to the idea of being willing to help me. The funeral director I talked to resorted to scare tactics. One said this could turn into a really bad science experiment. And another said, "I can't really sell you a cremation container because what happens if your dad's body rolls out of it?" Adding a little flair to the scare, really. And then The crematory, I had two options to work with, and it was the same sort of thing. I had to really work with them on multiple occasions to prove that I was able to act as my dad's person on his behalf. So overwhelmingly, the consistent message was, this is not how we do things, and what you're trying to do is literally impossible. So my father and our people have suffered extraordinary levels of institutional oppression. He wanted to be free of institutions and death. He wanted agency. He wanted family. And ritual is an art of remembering to remember. And my journey with my dad and this family-led post-death care really awakened a ceremonial reconnection to my ancestors. And when the gates were open, my family and our community were able to honor my dad in a way that was true to him and that was true to us. And that was a powerful experience. It is, in my opinion, imperative that we ask folks in the death care industry to consider the ways in which gatekeeping continues to force the very same gatekeeping that has been the driving force of the historical oppression, by the way, that is, why it's continuing and how we perpetuate that to force people into deathways that lack personalized meaning and are driven by power, consumerism, and the status quo. And how can we be more conscious of that gatekeeper mentalities? And how can we stop perpetuating it to invite access, empowerment, and agency, and to really build bridges to our people, to our land, and to our cultures?
Yes.
Oh, it's my dad.
I think I speak not only for myself when I say how heartbreaking it is to hear sorry, is this better? I think I speak not only for myself when I say how heartbreaking it is to hear the number of obstacles and speed bumps you've had to come across to honor your father in the way that he wished, and how admirable, how much admiration we have for you for having accomplished this task. So thank you for telling this story. This is really meaningful to all of us, I think. Joelle, would you like to go next, please?
Definitely. Hello, everyone. My name is Joelle Maldonado. I am a funeral director, embalmer, and the founder of the Multicultural Death and Grief Care Academy. My academy was founded because when I was in mortuary school, I did not learn how to take care of anyone that looked like me, prayed like me, thought like me, related to death and grief like me. And when I got into the field, so to speak, of serving families through my apprenticeship, I realized that seasoned professionals didn't have that training either. And that, to be frank, older white men were traumatizing Black families through their lack of cultural competency, cultural sensitivity, and cultural inclusion. And so I often share the story of, actually, I'm going to pick on you a little bit, of walking into an embalming room and a woman that was adorning beautiful braids like the braids Ashley's wearing, a very seasoned funeral director that was supposed to be training me was cutting those braids from that woman's scalp, which means that he was cutting her hair, all of her hair off, in ignorance. And so, of course, in that moment, I took the opportunity to educate him, redirect him, and change his perspective on how he was mistreating Black bodies. And so at the time, that experience was very frustrating for me, and to be transparent, it pissed me off. And I'm the type of person, when I get pissed off, I don't necessarily react in anger. I react in forming solutions. And so my solution to that was to begin to not only teach my colleagues, but other random people on the internet about caring for people that look like me. And so in 2020, I started teaching courses online, and the response was overwhelming, to say the least. And to pivot in a way that is culturally inclusive, but also in ways that make a safe space for people to come and ask their questions, because we simply just don't know what we don't know. So in order to do that, I've had to pivot. The name of my academy started off as the Black Death, Grief, and Cultural Care Academy, which I realize now was a great name, but it wasn't as inclusive as I wanted it to be. And so we pivoted from the Black Death, Grief, and Cultural Care Academy to the Multicultural Death and Grief Care Academy. And that was confirmed with me in a random trip to Sam's Club on a Saturday morning. And if anyone has ever been to Sam's Club on a Saturday morning, you know that it's hell. So in the midst of this hell that is Sam's Club on Saturday morning, I asked what motivated her or, inspired her to get that art. She shared the story with me about how her best friend had passed away, and they utilized a funeral service in our area. And this gentleman happened to be Hispanic, and he was told, or I'm sorry, not he, his family was told that they were not allowed to allow a mariachi band to perform final ritual for him in the funeral home because it was a liability to their building's insurance, which, to be frank, was bullshit. Thank you. And so we're expanding to be more culturally inclusive of all communities, especially communities of color and marginalized communities. We also educate about technical things like doing makeup for a person of color, because that process is very different. And one of the most traumatic experiences anyone can have is seeing their loved one and them not looking like themselves, and not because of trauma, but because of their makeup not being applied, them being 4 or 5 shades darker than their natural appearance or too light. How do we take out braids? How do we care for beautiful locks? What do we do with natural hair? How do we have conversations with people that don't look, think, relate to, pray, or grieve like we do about grief and death? And how do we hold space for those communities? So that's me, and that's what I do.
Thank you. Again, how heartbreaking that you've had to come up across these experiences, and how heartwarming it is that you've had what it takes to overcome them and educate the rest of us on better ways of being in the world, frankly. So thank you for being you and for all you do. Jasmine, I'd like to turn it over to you, please.
Thank you. What time is it? All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jasmine Cobb. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and bereavement specialist at Visual Healing Therapeutic Services, which is a clinical private practice. I'm also a doctoral candidate at Stephen F. Austin State University in Nacogdoches, Texas. And thank you all for being here today. And I'm glad to be here. I want to start this off by what resonated with me in my story. My mom died September 7th, 2020, and she was a married woman, but she left her only daughter in charge. Very close to my mom. She's always been there for me. Are y'all awake out there? All right, because I'm going to need your help with this. We were like peanut butter and salt, and we were good together throughout my whole life. And although my mom was deceased, it meant just as much to me to take care of her in death as I would have, and as I did while she was living. And so the funeral home that we chose, it's one that we use for my maternal grandfather, maternal grandmother. And so following, my family's tradition, use the same funeral home. And being a witness to previous processes seemed to go okay. They were satisfied. I was much younger then, but I'm also a millennial African-American at the intersection of Black woman in America. And let me say this, the funeral home was a Black funeral home. And like I said, we used it in my family, so I thought it would be a pretty smooth process like I witnessed. But I felt like I was breaking all the rules. And that's what resonated with me in my mind. When my mom died, she was no longer the size that she was while she was living. And so I didn't see my other family do this. But again, it was important to me that we're going to dress my mom like we would if she was living. They had a little silk robe. No, that wasn't my mom. I want to go to her closet and see what she has to bury her in. So we did find something, and it's like, is it dress rehearsal? Like, how do you navigate this if a person is living in their one size and then when they die, they're a different size? But again, needless to say, I felt like I was breaking all the rules. During the process, I got told, like, don't piss anybody off by the funeral home. And again, I was just trying to do my mom justice, in putting her away, like, I know that she would approve of. That's why she put me in charge, right? Um, and so it's an experience that I won't ever forget. And that's what's brought me here. I'm a grief specialist, but the death care side is what fuels my advocacy, because no one informed me how this process was going to go. And I think that's very important that people know that they have options outside of what they've seen. There we go. Thank you. And so, yeah, people need choices. And I brought up being a millennial for a reason. This particular funeral home was run by my elders. And in my city, in the city where I'm from, rather, there's not much diversity in undertakers, funeral directors. It's pretty, it lacks diversity. Let me just put it that way. And I was telling my husband actually this weekend, I said, you know what? If I had more time, I go back to school to be a funeral director. Because it's important that we educate people and, they know what their options are. And I know I've said that, but I want to drive that point home. And I think I'll just stop there.
Thank you. You're, I think, helping us recognize this theme of where culture meets access to fitting funeral care in America. And I'm sure we'll continue that theme. Tiana, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Chris.
It's on my screen, so I'd like to invite you to introduce yourself next, please.
Great, thank you. My name is Tiana Dargent. My pronouns are she and her. I'm coming from Canada. I'm not sure. I think I'm the only panelist from Canada right now. And I'm the founder of Queer Community Death Care. I'm a death doula, and I'm also a consultant for those working in end of life about how to be more inclusive in their work to the 2S LGBTQIA+ community. I came into this, after my training, after my learning, being really excited to serve my communities directly, and being pretty bummed to learn that there aren't, hospices for queer and trans people where I live, services that aren't existent within death care specifically for queer and trans people. And I started really digging into why that is. And, my main takeaways since I've started working in death has been that we have a real legacy of loss in our communities. And there's been a huge impact from ongoing systemic oppression of our communities, as well as the devastating impact that HIV/AIDS had on our community. And through progressive legalization over the years, we're really at the first
If you can hear me, I owe you an apology. Our technology is not what I'd love for it to be right now in this very moment, so you are cutting in and out. We are
No.
hearing bits and pieces. We'd like to hear more. I'm going to take a look over here and see if we're in good shape. We're doing our best. And again, we apologize. So do please continue, but know that we might be hearing you in bits and pieces. Forgive us.
Sure. So as I was saying, we're really coming on the first time where queer and trans people can be legally out about themselves and also are in death care spaces looking for service and advocating for ourselves. So there's a lot of places where our advocacy hasn't reached yet in death care. And it can be, places where oppression has been occurring systemically. So some examples would be, hospices or palliative care centers believing that they don't serve queer and trans people because people aren't out in their spaces, and then perpetuating a feeling of having to go back into the closet to access these spaces and access good care in these spaces. And we're also seeing things that are not really related to oppression come up that queer and trans people need to navigate, such as what do you do if you have gender affirming prosthetics that are not decomposable, but you want a natural burial? How do you find the services that work well for you and have to do with like environmental factors, for instance, rather than who you are and how you express yourself. And other issues that come up for us in these spaces are the standard old, assumptions about our names and pronouns or sexualities. If I go into a space looking for service and they're assuming that I am married to a man, do I feel safe coming out in this space or not? And in death care and end of life, this isn't the space where we want to be navigating safety questions. So I'm really talking about how do we help people create a more inclusive, welcoming environment for people of all expressions. Hello, hopefully you guys can hear me. My name is Alex Casas. I am the founder of Hearse and Cool Cube's mobile morgues. I'm an end-of-life and funeral care educator, death doula, the Texas Regional Director for the International Doula Life Movement, and an active volunteer with the Funeral Consumer Alliance of Central Texas. I have over 12 years of hands-on experience. I started my career as a mortuary restoration specialist, working in diverse settings such as high-volume care centers, medical examiner offices, and funeral homes of various denominations. And that really opened my experience to see firsthand the challenges that families faced. But my journey really started earlier than that. In probably second grade, I told my mom that I wanted to work with the dead. And that really just came from us being in a proud Mexican household where we took care of our elders and we participated in their final arrangements and their funerals. And that was just very normal for us. I remember vividly having lunch at my grandmother's grave and cleaning the grave and sitting there just eating our food and being present. So this was never something that was foreign to me. But then I had this experience with my grandfather who, even after having all this curiosity and previous knowledge, I went in to see him on his bed where he looked completely different and he was emaciated. And I remember as my 8-year-old brain trying to comprehend what was happening and feeling like this wasn't him and what were we doing and what was wrong. And then, years later, I started to realize and put the pieces together that he actually had what most people would have wanted. He was able to die at home, surrounded by family. I mean, he waited till my sister made it before he actually died. And it was actually a beautiful experience, but it reminded me that we really don't know what we don't know. And education can play such an important part into how we view death and dying. So I am here to kind of open the discussion on how we can remove obstacles for families seeking more control over end of life and funeral care, to discuss how to change the narratives around death and remove unnecessary obstacles like language and economical barriers, and also clarify a lot of the misconceptions around death.
like the misconception that bodies suddenly become dangerous after death, or the misconception that embalming is required by law. We are at a pivotal point in our society where I feel it is vital that we rebuild the trust in death care and that we offer more transparency to help consumers of all kinds make more personal and informed decisions for themselves, and understand that they do have access to a broad range of options to tailor services to meet their specific needs, traditions, or financial realities. We have an understanding that no two families are the same, and death care shouldn't be either. We can offer practical solutions for more comprehensive, authentic, positive, and healing experiences that honor each individual. Because death care is a right, not a privilege. And informed families equal empowered families. And as professionals, our role is to provide support and not control. And we really need to start releasing that control by setting higher standards for transparency and adapting to modern times. Like today's digital age, there is absolutely no excuse for not providing an easily accessible price list online. And I say this because in Austin, Texas, where I am located, we have a provider who offers direct cremation for $695, while another provider who predominantly serves the Latino community offers the same service for $4,000. If we continue to settle for just using the funeral home that the family has always used, or the funeral home down the street, we might actually be selecting an option that doesn't align with our financial realities or our personal choices. And this really does impact minority communities. Something that Professor Hayman touched on was prepaying services. And we see that a lot in our communities where family service counselors are sent to these low-income communities and advertising these prepaying services. And that can actually be a way of saying, hey, you're locking in today's prices without the consideration of competitive markets that will actually bring down those prices later in time. So that really has brought me here to kind of advocate for that. And also my experience of seeing these families turned away because of their personal beliefs or their language, which we can do better for. And we do not have to be experts in everything. We have a wonderful community of resources that we can pull from. Like Joelle said earlier, when I was a mortuary restoration specialist, that was something that I found unbelievable when we were doing the same, I mean, it was copy and paste for every individual, despite color or ethnicity, and that just isn't how it works. So being able to call in experts that are proficient in those areas, we can do that, and we can provide more comprehensive services. So I'm excited to be here with all of you.
Thank you so much, Alex. It's an honor and privilege to have you as part of our group today. We only have a few more minutes before we break into the next sort of subsection, which is the Mentimeter and the questions and answers that we've seen in earlier panels today. But in the few minutes that we have left, if I may, Jasmine, put you on the spot here. One question that we're looking at is, how do DEI issues affect accessibility in death care spaces? And for me, the question sort of becomes, how can we do better? How can someone like me, a white funeral director, serve the community in a more authentic and honoring way? And something that you've talked about with us in our group chats before is the 5 A's. And I think that would be helpful to hear a little bit more about if you don't mind sharing that with us.
I absolutely do not mind sharing with everyone. And you all can hear me okay on this mic? Okay, sounds kind of low. But thank you. The 5 A's of Conscientious Care by Dr. Tashelle Bordier is all about replacing assumptions. The 5 A's stand for acknowledge, ask, accept, align, and apologize. And I want to underscore that accepting or alignment doesn't always mean that you have to understand, but just being open to a dialogue and going back to cultural humility to take in the seat, even as the professional or expert in death care, and being a learner. it's a learning opportunity. It's about collaboration. And I think that's what the 5 A's of conscientious care emphasizes. And if I was empowered with that knowledge at the time when I was in that seat as the caretaker of my mom, even though she was deceased, I would have advocated for myself just a little bit more, because again, I felt like you're here, we tell you how we can help you, and that's the end of story. And so that's why I go back to, I felt like I was breaking all the rules, but thank you.
And I think that's equally applicable to, I'm thinking of Vinia's story about her dad and being told this could turn into a bad science experiment. Like, how different could that experience have been if she had been told, I acknowledge that I'm not as familiar with this death way as I could be. I apologize that I'm not as familiar with this death way as I could be. How can I align myself with you better to provide you an honoring experience? As well as Joelle's story about the hair cutting. My goodness, like if we had just asked some questions, maybe it wouldn't have come to, a non-consensual haircut. My goodness. What are some other thoughts that you guys have about this or other topics in the next couple of minutes that we have?
Good now. We've talked a lot about the home aspect and the personalization aspect of death care. And as beautiful as home ritual and ceremony can be, as a funeral director that works in a community where that is not the norm, not saying that's right or wrong, but where it's not the norm, a lot of times in the moment, perhaps that's not the time, I don't want to say to demand, but to expect immediate change, right? And so I'm always going to be a huge component of planning ahead, even if it's not financial. Pre-planning is not just about money. It's about expressing your wants, expressing your desires, expressing your needs, and making accommodations for that. I'm also a huge believer that working in death care is not about poverty. And if we're having conversations about inclusion and equity and diversity, we have to understand that as death care professionals, particularly as licensed individuals, a lot of times we don't look at the business aspect when we talk about prices. The funeral home is one of the few places that is running 24/7, whether it's with a cooler or with lights or with anything that we would need to operate and do our jobs at any point, day or night. And so when we talk about those things, as idealistic as it sounds to say, oh, we need to lower prices and we need to do this and that, we also have to be realistic about the cost that it takes to operate facilities.
I think I would just say that visibility is a really important part of how we could affect change in this area. To know that an option like what I did with my dad, although I know that not everybody would want to do that or could do that, to know that that option exists is really important. My 4 nephews who attended my dad's services and spent time with him in a way that I never had the chance to do as a young person, how much that would normalize an experience. If that was your first experience in a death situation up close, so can we normalize some of these? Can we make these options visible and available and normalize them so that we can have the full menu? I want the full menu. I want to be able to know what my options are.
Yes, informed consent. Or just being, informed. Can I share one quick thing? And ironically, the cemetery actually called me this week and they were like, well, yeah, we're just calling because the area where your mom is getting pretty full over there. I guess if I wanted to buy a plot, and I said, well, actually, I'm exploring other options. Have you ever heard of green burial? And they're like, no, we haven't heard anything about that. I said, okay. And so I was like, I'm planning to do some community education, so I'll circle back when time permits. But yeah, we need to know we have other choices.
Thank you. I also just want to acknowledge that this is having to do the education work is both an honor and a burden. So like holding those two things in tension as we move forward in those directions. Someone was just pointing at the screen. It sounds like maybe someone up there has something that they'd like to share.
Yes, it's me. I just wanted to kind of add in, I love the idea of I want the full menu, and I want the full menu and the option of a la carte. I want to be able to customize my services as needed. We absolutely do need to understand that it is still a profitable business, but you can be a profitable business and still have ethics involved. And being transparent about what is available is where we start with that. It doesn't have to be one way or another. There is the flexibility to create these a la carte options that give us the ability to choose from a simple service or an elaborate service. And we can customize that without it impacting directly the financial portion or the profit of a funeral home.
Very well put. I don't know if you could hear the room clapping when you.
I'd just like to follow up on what Joelle was saying about pre-planning and its importance. And the queer community has less access to pre-planning a lot of the time because we have some more obstacles. So sometimes our next of kin isn't who we would want to have making our decisions for us at end of life. And figuring out how to manage to assign it to somebody else is an obstacle in a lot of ways, as well as a financial obstacle, just to get that advice, to get somebody to help you make a legal document. So a lot of the work I do goes into supporting queer and trans people into preparing their advanced plans, because we see way too often like a tragic story of a trans person, for example, passing away, and they don't have any pre-planning done and they are estranged from their kin, but it does go to their next of kin to make all of these decisions. And that next of kin may not recognize their gender, their sexuality, their current name, pronouns, how they dress. And so it creates a situation for all of those involved in the post-death care of this person where they may need to be treating somebody in a way that they know they shouldn't, but legally they have to. And so it makes it very important to support our community and access to pre-planning, and also to think about if you're a service provider, what will you do in those situations when you're asked to represent somebody in a way that they wouldn't want themselves to be represented?
Thank you. And then it's almost Mentimeter time, but very quickly, Joelle, I think, had something that she would like to add.
I just wanted to add to the education part. I don't know if we have any owners here of funeral homes or services, but it's a huge burden to put on your team about cultural competency. That is your job as the owner.
Can I just add in one thing to that? With my personal experience, what I saw firsthand was that Spanish-speaking families were getting turned away just because the funeral home refused to have a bilingual person on staff. And I, being bilingual, just chose to do it because somebody had to do it, and I didn't feel comfortable just letting a family who had just lost their baby to be sent somewhere else. And I was doing this, 24/7. If somebody was calling that was a Spanish speaker and I was off, I was still answering my phone. And that is something that as funeral owners, we should be able to provide those services without it just being reliant on the one bilingual staff member in your team.
24-hour phone translation services are much less expensive than you would think that they are. I'll add that, having done research prompted by the conversation that we had earlier. So I appreciate that input. It's really made me think.